Good morning, everyone. We're here at the Music Chat again, and we are going to be talking today about what the Library of Congress calls the most powerful song of the 20th century. And we all know it as We Shall Overcome. We're in the week just before we celebrate the MLK holiday, and we're also in a season in our country right now where, we feel like we've maybe had some occasion to reflect back on the times that this was used in the civil rights movement, and we're in this season where we're having some unrest, and so it might be a good thing for us to reflect a little bit this week about the tradition of this song and how it came about and how it's influenced in the past and will influence in the future. Was used in sit-ins and rallies and became the anthem of the civil rights movement of the 1960s. But we, as always happens when we go back and delve into the history of the songs that we study on the Music Chat, we unfold such a rich history that goes back hundreds of years once again. And so Barbara's with me, and we found out that we're going to start clear back in the 1790s. There was a Roman Catholic hymn that was called O Santissima, and that is it's a hymn that was sung to the Blessed Virgin Mary, and it was an anonymous European folk tune that they used for this, and it was sung, supposedly they feel like it was sung by Sicilian fishermen. At the end of the day, when the day would end, they would sing this Hail to the Virgin Mary, so to speak, and it was to a tune that we still know today. It is still used in our own hymn book. We know it as
Lord, dismiss us with our blessing.
She's going to remind us of the melody, and if you know the song We Shall Overcome, you might perk up right away. She's just going to sing the first line, and this opening phrase is what they think is the ancestral beginning of the melody that's now used for that
I think we could call it the earworm that was in the slaves' ears at the time.
Perhaps, yes.
And we'll talk more about that later, but yeah, so this is what we know, and you probably know it too. Lord, dismiss us with your blessing, fill our hearts with joy and peace.
And it has a second line that matches the first, and then a little phrase at the end. It's different, and we use it as a dismissal song quite frequently.
But that beginning, you'll hear again. Yeah,
that's right. We shall overcome matches that very closely.
It does.
So we get this started, and that was the first known printing was in 1792 in a thing called the European Magazine, and you can Google it. It's out there, that first printing of that melody you can see, and then it was used and as the European hymns often did, that traveled across to America, where it'll hook up later with people over here. And so we go now, we get into the 1860s, and here in America we know what was going on in the 1860s. We were just in the cusp of Civil War in the mid-1860s, and the early 1860s. And we have a song that also, they think this was an African spiritual that they feel was very influenced by that melody.
Yeah, and again, I say the earworm, but you have to understand also that the slaves would hear these melodies. Again, we talked before about they might be the one that was taking the family to church or something, and they sat outside and the windows were open.
Yes.
So I just think that it was around because it was in their ears.
These European hymns often became sort of entwined with African American culture and tradition, and they say some of the greatest musical works came to be because of that merging.
Oh yeah, we've also explored
exactly.
that.
So the words in this case that were married to this tune, the Sicilian Mariners tune that Barbara just sang, now is going to take a text that is very, very striking.
It's hard to sing.
And this particular version of the song was called No More Auction Block. And it was sung by Union black soldiers and also already freed people, or people who lived in the North who were fighting for freedom and for Southern African Americans. And these words are very hard to sing, very hard to read.
Yeah.
Barbara's going to do it because we want you to see how the melody is, again, the melody that we think of. It reminds us so much of We Shall Overcome. This is part of the evolution. These words are even more provoking in some ways than our current words are that we use, but they're harder to listen to.
A different kind of song.
It is.
I think they use that melody to express their sorrow, their grief, their condition, whereas I think it morphed into a more hopeful situation. But it's very similar. It's a no more auction block for me, no more, no more, no more auction block for me, many a thousand gone. And then the next verse, I won't sing all of it, but it's no more driver's lash for me. And then the other one is no more whiplash for me, no more pint of salt for me. And then it finishes, no more auction block for me, no more, no more, no more auction block for me, many a thousand gone.
Tough song.
Tough.
Yeah, yeah.
Brings it right home, doesn't it?
It does. It's in some ways it was difficult to spend time with this. It's almost hard. It's so heartbreaking to read these lyrics and to sing these lyrics.
Yeah, and you know, in all the stuff that we looked at and whatever, at one point I read how, and we talked about this, how important music was to the slaves. It was sacred to them, and it was, if you think about it, it really was their way of communicating. It was their way of grieving. It was their way of uniting. So I think that's why, for me, spirituals have always had such a powerful place in my choral life. So many performances, it was one of the best things we sang.
You still like a good spiritual. Any excuse
do.
to sing one.
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
I
think
agree.
they're
Yeah.
very honest.
So then, we'll leave the melody. So now we're in the 1860s with this melody that you just sang and those provoking words. But the words, those words now are going to drop away, but the melody is going to survive. We're going to come into the 1900s. There's a black Methodist preacher who was born in the 1850s, but he was really writing this in the 1900s, right at the turn of the century. He wrote a hymn for his congregation called "I'll Overcome Someday." I'll overcome someday. So now we have this new idea, a new set of words that, he did not use the melody that we're talking about, so it's a separate melody, It's just a standard, it was a standard Methodist hymn. You know, the hymn book that they had in the hymnary online, number 864 in the African American Heritage Hymnal, or 1863, or number 863 perhaps, I'm not sure, but, and you know, so it had a life and made its way into many Methodist hymn books at that time. And you know, it has, you know, the words now are used, it's used as the refrain of the hymn. And it's really more about overcoming the trials that we have on earth, the temptations that we have on earth. So it has a little bit of a different flavor than we think of the "we shall overcome" that we use now in our protest.
It was more a thing of, if you continue to do good, you will get rewards in heaven, kind of
so
a thing.
the refrain kind of does this. It's there's 6 verses. I'll overcome someday, someday. I'll overcome someday. If in my heart I do not yield, I'll overcome someday.
There you go. Yeah.
So it has like 6 verses that have words of similar sort of character to them. But what's kind of interesting about, you know, his connection to what became We Shall Overcome is he himself is African American. He was born in 1851, so he was the son of, his father was a slave, his mother was free. And so he lived with his mother and was influenced by her because it was safe, you know, it was safer to live. Apparently they weren't together, and you know, one was enslaved, one wasn't. So that's striking. Maybe his father was freed at some point. I don't really know. You know, I didn't read a lot about him.
I didn't remember that particularly, but he obviously, again, you know, and this goes back over and over with the people that we have studied. Not all of them were in a position to be formally educated. But here was a man who was smart.
Yeah, and he himself was more self-educated.
He taught everything. In fact, he did a correspondence course with the Boston School of Theology or something, so that he could be ordained as a Methodist minister. He couldn't get it because he had a degree, so he had to take an exam, and he passed it with flying colors because he taught himself. He taught himself Hebrew. He taught himself Greek.
Yeah.
You know, it just, as an educator, you know, it just makes you know the power of that. So I really have a lot of respect for him after reading about him.
Oh, for sure. And I think it's just so appropriate in a way that his parents had that heritage. And, you know, I think he would be so pleased, really, that if indeed that first use of the idea of I'll overcome someday, it started with that seed of an idea. I think he would be very pleased at where that's traveled to.
Well, and I have to say before we leave him that when he was first ordained, they kind of put him as an interim person in tons of different churches, and then he was finally given his church that he grew up in back in Philadelphia, and he totally turned it around. By the time by the time he passed away, I believe there were 10,000 members, and it was because he was so charismatic. And they eventually named the church after him.
Nice.
So, what a legacy, you know.
And you don't have his dates, do you? I know he was born in 1851. I want to say he died in the 30s, maybe. I mean, he lived a pretty good long life and was well into our century.
Yeah, I could find it, but I'm not.
Yeah, I know.
I'm not
but
sure
I guess the point is, he's not so far back. He's.
Yeah, and it's that time period, you know, when the late 1800s, when so much was going on, especially with the slave population, freed slave population, and then the turn of the century. When 1901 is when this hymn was actually published, and then all that changed from then on. Then by the time he was at the end of his life, then there was more of the Jim Crow laws and those kinds of things that were really again, putting the freed slave population in a very different light. So he lived in a really important time for the Black community,
right,
for sure.
and made such a
lasting impact.
right, such
legacy.
a positive impact on what was happening at the time.
And even though there's just a
Yeah.
little snippet, he did influence the creation of this particular.
Very much so.
And the fact that so many people in Black churches were singing it.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't, so now the melody's not new, the words aren't new, but they're not together yet. So now we kind of leave Mr. Tinley and we're well into the 1900s now. We get to about the 1940s, 1945, 1946. There was a pair of gospel arrangers named Atron Twig and Kenneth Morris. I don't think I have that first guy's name right, but they are credited with actually putting our version, the version that we more realize today. They sort of merged that together and used the melody with the overcome words. It was called We'll Overcome. And what happened was there was the American Tobacco Company there was a strike that was occurring in the 1940s, and a member of the striking people was this Lucille Simmons. She knew the song and she took it to the strike, and they were striking. It was a labor strike for more pay, and they started to use the song during this strike movement.
Right.
And so that was its first use that we know of it sort of leaving the churches
just the Black community as far as being sung in the churches and among the African Americans, you know. And I also, as you were talking, thought about the fact that yes, this was a version of it. It is not the final version.
Right.
It was still tweaked and changed here
especially
and there.
where the words were concerned.
Yeah, as we went on. But you're right. This person knew it. So this was a group of white people and Black people who were striking in Charleston, South Carolina, because they were making like 35 cents an hour.
Well, no, they were striking to get 30 cents an hour.
Yeah, so it's just unbelievable. But and it became, through that, it started to be put into a different arena and have a different meaning, I think. And then eventually what happened was the people that were involved, some of the women that were involved in this strike, ended up going to this Highlanders Center in Tennessee. And it was a place where union leaders, people that were trying to be involved in social justice, they would come and they would meet. It would be like a retreat for them where they could learn things, get tools that would help them. Leadership skills. And the woman that was there as the director of music at that time learned this song from these people from Charleston that were in this thing, and she would then teach it to these people that would come to this Highlander Center. And it gained a great deal of popularity, and it became as one of the tools that they would give these people that would come to the Highlander Center to use when they go back to their communities. And one of the persons that came there was Pete Seeger, because he was that kind of guy. I mean, he was going around. He traveled with Alan Lomax early on to get folk music in America. He traveled with Woody Guthrie. And I think anybody that knows Pete Seeger is, in his heart, he fights for social justice. And so he was at this center and was taught this song. And they had a bit of a conversation about some of the words. And at that time, I believe early on when he was learning it, it was I will overcome.
He changed. I think there was some changes that happened before he got there. His
the
change
we was probably changed.
He gave
before.
us the shall overcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And and that was only because he thought it sounded better.
The I had already changed to we.
To we, you're right.
By the time we get to the labor strike.
That's right.
The hymn, Charles Tinley's hymn had the I shall overcome.
That's right.
And so that dropped off.
And
but you had an interesting story about the I versus the we.
Yeah,
that was sort of a cool
I think
story.
that's worth reading actually, because I thought it had great significance. One of the women who was talking about how it started out as the word I, and I may have to here it is. So bear with me. This is worth the time, I think. This is from British Johnson Regan, and she was part of the Freedom Singers and whatever, and she was retelling this story.
Now, do you have a date at all?
We're talking about I believe like in the 50s.
Oh, okay, so a little bit later.
Yeah.
Okay.
She says the left, dominated by whites, believed that in order to express the group, you should say we. In the black community, if you want to express the group, you have to say I. Because if we say we, I have no idea who's going to be there. Have you ever been in a meeting? People say, we're going to bring some food tomorrow to feed the people. And you sit there on the bench and say, I have no idea. It is when I say I'm going to bring a cake and somebody else says I'll bring chicken, that you actually know you're going to get a dinner. So there are many black traditional collective expression songs where it's I, because in order for you to get a group you have to have I's. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I implies more action than we. We could be anybody.
That's right.
Or nobody.
Well, and it's like, okay, so it's a collection of that person's going to do this, that.
That's right.
And then she goes on to say, and we've been singing the song all our lives, and there's this guy who just learned the song, and he's telling us that instead of doing I, it should be we. And you know what I said to myself? If you need it, you got it. What that statement does for me is document the presence of black and white people in this country fighting against injustice. And you have black people accepting that need because they were also accepting that support and that help. That's, I think, pretty significant.
That's a great story, yeah. So
very significant.
I guess you have to have a lot of eyes to have a we.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because then you know exactly which eyes are going to make the we. So cool.
I know, I've been in those meetings. We need to do this, we need to do that. And, well, who's going to do this and that?
I know. I just think that is the most precious story.
She was very wise.
I love it.
Yeah, she was very wise.
So
the point of this is, these decades that were going on, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, some of the words were tweaked here and there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and his tweak was he changed the we will overcome to we shall overcome. And of course we know that stuck.
That's absolutely, and then he would take it and teach it. He taught it to the people at Carnegie Hall. I mean, he just took it everywhere.
Yeah.
And it was picked up, of course, by other people as well, Joan Baez and other people, that it was that folk movement in the 60s. And he went back to the Highlander Center and was leading a singing session there, and Martin Luther King happened to be in the audience. And afterwards, after he left that session, he was quoted as saying, that song just kind of stuck with me. I couldn't really get it out of my head. And I thought, and he used it in one of his speeches, and much after that, and the rest is history. I mean,
probably the first time my ears ever heard those words were recordings of
his
Martin
speeches.
Luther King giving the famous speeches and whatnot.
And they added verses, the verse about we shall not be afraid, or we shall not have fear, or something like that.
We shall not be afraid.
Because and that came after the Montgomery bombing? Was it?
No,
No, the
no,
Selma.
it was back in Tennessee. There was a youth group in the center attending a leadership thing, and the local thugs came in
That's right.
and raided the place.
That's right. You know? And it was dark, and they
came in to kind of give everybody a whole hard time and kind of bully them.
Yep.
And they were in the middle of, they were watching a movie, and so the lights were out. Right. And they're like, turn on the lights, turn on the lights, and they wouldn't turn on the lights.
That's right.
You know, and
they started
singing. Will not be afraid.
That's right.
Is something that
so
might not be
powerful.
exact. Yeah.
So powerful. And John Lewis, you know, the wonderful senator from Georgia, from Georgia, who just passed away, talks about singing it when he was in the jail cell after he'd been beaten. And after I spent time with this, it was like, man, I don't know whether I even have the authority to be able to even talk about this, this piece of music, because it has such an honored legacy.
It does. And telling it through our eyes is not the same as telling it through African American eyes.
Right.
And we have a solution for that.
That's right.
Yeah, we learned a lot about the song from watching some videos that were on YouTube and also reading a lot of articles. But there is a link that we're going to put on the end too. It's about an 8-minute video that a young man, very bright young man, has put together a very concise history of this, complete with some singing in it and some old recordings of just precious recordings. It's the recording that sort of got me interested in the auction block song, and you know, I think that is worth watching the video right there, is to spend a little time contemplating that. It really puts in, it's just a concise video of what we've been talking about here for a few minutes. So I really encourage everyone to watch that video, and being a more authentic source than Barbara and I could ever be.
Right.
But you know, we were talking about when we decided to do this, you know, we didn't know that, you know, the week before Martin Luther King holiday, we would have so much unrest in our own country. And so it really, there's so many layers, you know, doing this chat right here in the second week of January has turned out to be, it has much more layers of meaning to us than it probably would have. And it also makes us feel more responsible for trying to tell the story, but to do it respectfully, knowing that our eyes can never be, you know, truly seeing what this kind of thought means to someone who's lived in African American shoes. I don't know how else to say it. You know?
We need to always be diligent about looking for injustice and trying to be one of the eyes in the room that actually does something, either by the way you act, the way you show kindness, whatever. And I don't know, I'll take a few little seconds to finish.
It would be a great way to wrap up and to celebrate, you know, next Monday, the country pauses for this holiday.
I never really grasped the power of this song to elevate the remembrance and the honor that we owe to Martin Luther King. But I feel that way now.
Yes.
And this was from a speech that Martin Luther King gave in February of 1965, and he said, yes, we were singing We Shall Overcome just a few minutes ago, and he said the words, we shall overcome, deep in my heart I do believe we shall overcome. And this is very relevant for us today, and I believe it because somehow the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. We shall overcome because Carlyle is right. No lie can live forever. We shall overcome because William Cullen Bryant is right. Truth crushed to earth will rise again. We shall overcome because James Russell Lowell is right. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own.
It's a beautiful, beautiful words.
Beautiful words.
I think to myself too, you know, it feels sometimes like, you know, we take 3 steps forward and 2
Yes.
steps back, 3
Yes.
steps forward, but we're taking more steps forward. We slip back, but it's a leapfrog, I hope. That's the hope I have.
I agree with you on that.
3 steps forward, but only 2 steps back.
I agree with that.
So let's hope that we've only maybe lost a step or 2 and that we can leapfrog back, you know, and as quickly as possible and move on.
And let me just add one little thing to that. I hope that what has happened has allowed us all to take those steps back and all of us to take those steps forward, because I feel like a lot of people feel like they've already made that progress, but there are a whole lot of people that are still way back here because we don't see them. So
Leave no one behind.
leave no one
Yeah,
behind for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So with that, it was an honor to talk about this
It was.
song today. And again, the Library of Congress says most powerful song of the 20th century, and the anthem of our civil rights movement from the 60s. And really a privilege and an honor to talk with you
Absolutely.
today about it,
Yeah.
Barb. We'll see you next time on the music chat.
Bye.